All right. Yeah, I hope everybody's ready after Premier Ebby's talk to maybe dive into something that's a little more heavy on the applied geostatistics side. So yeah, we'll get started here. My talk is on the NAC Porphyry project, which is in central British Columbia. It's at the northern end of the Babine Porphyry Belt. So this is an Eocene age porphyry belt, which is somewhat underrepresented amongst what's currently being mined and explored in BC. But that said, there's a couple operating mines in the region, past producing mines in the region at Bell and Grand Isle and the Morrison deposit, and the NAC properties at the north end of that. Work to date by the company has demonstrated considerable size and grade potential, and we've significantly expanded upon historically defined mineralized zones. We've encountered multiple mineralization styles and numerous intrusive phases, and with differing alteration overprints, this has really complicated the modeling process. And so what I'll be focusing on today is the efforts after 3 seasons of drilling now to kind of bring all of our geological alteration, mineralization information together. And to do this, we've used some somewhat novel statistical clustering and dimension reduction techniques. And this has really complemented the geological data we have and helped our geologists who've been working pretty diligently in this off-season to construct a lithological model. So yeah, before we get into that, I'll just get into a quick property summary. Again, this is central BC, low elevation. It's pretty low cost exploration. There's good access to water. All of the exploration to date has taken place within a clear cut. And because of that, minimal helicopter support is required. And it doesn't have the snow loads that you get up in the Golden Triangle. So year-round exploration is possible. A map of the property and the location. You can see Smithers down there in the southwest. It's about 80 kilometers northeast of Smithers. And as I talked about earlier, you can see it's at the north end of the Babine Porphyry Belt. We're surrounded by A-Mark's Duke property, which is their joint venture with Boliden Mining. And so, yeah, we've got neighbors who are also active in the area, which is great. It's good to have a good collaborative exploration community up there. And the NAC property of the past few years has renewed some interest in the region. So yeah, it's been good going so far. Bit of background information for the exploration. This is a geology map with the outline of the drill traces. There's been just shy of 48,000 meters drilled on the property, but dating back to 1964. So it's had a long history, but there was a pretty big hiatus between the 90s and the next phase of significant drilling, which was us in 2022. As you can see, the bulk of the drilling is concentrated along the southwest margin of what this big pink zone in the middle is inferred to be the porphyry, the Babine porphyry stock that's kind of driving the mineralization on the property. For geophysics, it's got a pretty classic porphyry geophysical signature. We've got a large annular magnetic high with a bit of a north-south-ish trending fabric within it. And then it's flanked by an annular chargeability ring, which surrounds that magnetic high and is roughly central around that porphyry stock. So a very classic porphyry geophysical signature. Getting into the mineralization, it's best defined, obviously, where the bulk of the drilling has focused. So we have pretty high-grade gold, high gold to copper ratio in our south zone, which is the only instance of more classic porphyry stockwork we see on the property. And then the south zone, as we traverse to depth, sees quite a bit of mineralization hosted within bounding conglomerates. So we've got bornite veining, bornite disseminations, and chalcopyrite disseminations, and some pretty spectacular mineralization within the south zone. It gets a little bit narrow, pinches narrower to the north, and then expands again in the north zone where we see some near-surface, more copper-rich mineralization. And then as we get deeper in the north zone, we see that similar conglomerate-hosted, more gold-rich mineralization within disseminations and vein-hosted stuff. So this is to preface what I'm about to focus on by saying that there's quite a compelling system here. It's quite complex, and it warrants a bit more of an academic approach to try and understand this. Some of the challenges we've had in developing a model is there's extensive till cover and very poor outcrop exposure. So we don't really have a ton of information to extrapolate drill lithologies to surface. There's very poorly documented historical data. We don't have access to the detailed logs or the complete geochemical suite. And we found a number of discrepancies between what was reported in the assessment reports and what we found on the ground at the drill collar locations. And throughout our drilling, we've encountered numerous texturally diverse dike phases and a strong variable alteration that overprints all the lithologies. So it's, it's not as easy as connecting A to B visually. There's also a large distance between step-outs up until this season. So in 2023, we expanded west of the south zone and west of the north zone and have been able to generate some pretty detailed sections within those zones, but there's about 500 meters between the two. About 500 meters between the two zones that makes connecting and making inferences upon what's between those zones difficult. As you can see, a lot of dikes encountered, a lot of different dikes, and then somewhat gently dipping sedimentary host rocks of these, and that all abuts this Babian porphyry stock that we have to the east. So yeah, connecting between the north and the south, any large-scale features was difficult until this season of drilling in 2024, where we significantly infilled between those zones. So the approach we've taken this off-season since we finished drilling towards the end of October is trying to generate enough knowledge so that we can do interpolation methods via 3D modeling. So that requires a good understanding of structure and the orientation of the various lithological components. And so as I touched on, we did not have that until this season. So in 2024, we more systematically drilled the zone and have that data to analyze. So we have it all at our warehouse down in Penticton. Having those rocks and the skeleton core of these holes to reference has been hugely helpful. And we generated large plan maps, level plans, and sections across the zone. And our geologists, our logging geologists, have now been working, tying everything together. And in order to help with that, we can drape it all in 3D. So this is the results to date of putting together these hand-drawn models. Might seem like a bit of an archaic technique, but when there's this much stuff going on, simply connecting things in Leapfrog when you don't have the information, confident information in the orientations, doesn't necessarily provide very good results. So to lend confidence to these interpretations, we've employed some novel geostatistical analysis techniques to help the modeling process along and verify these interpretations. So throughout the 3 seasons that we've drilled, we've done continuous 4-asset digestion, 48-element ICP-MS for all of our sampling. Question is, can we use this data set to more effectively categorize lithological formations and visualize trends? And yeah, geologists do this all the time. It's one of the reasons why spending a little bit extra on the more detailed analysis techniques in the assay stage can go a long way to help interpretations. So we selected 9 immobile elements. These are elements immobile, meaning that they're not added or removed from the volume of rock via the interaction of hydrothermal fluids. So anything that's going to affect alteration or mineralization, in theory, doesn't necessarily change the amount of these immobile elements, these rock-forming elements, auxiliary rock-forming elements. So we filtered the data to exclude mixed lithologies, any fault zones, breccia, in the odd instance where lithology boundaries were crossed because they were very narrow through the sampling. So this was all filtered out of the data set. And then zirconium, which is a pretty important immobile element, is somewhat notoriously unreliable via 4-acid digestion, and it's a lot more expensive to get zirconium data from lithium borate fusion whole rock analysis, and you can't really apply that to a 3-meter long core sample, for example, anyway. But what we've done throughout the season is done on-the-meter portable XRF sampling, and from the whole rock sampling we have done in seasons prior, we found that the zirconium much more closely agrees from the XRF data versus the 4-acid data. So break down the data set into meter-long intervals, bring in the zirconium from the portable XRF, and then run a principal component analysis on the 9 immobile elements. This generates 9 different principal components. And now typically when using principal component analysis, you plot up the 2 main principal components, maybe the 3rd one if you want to do a 3D scatter plot, and kind of ignore the rest because they don't influence the data as much. But via this somewhat new open source UMAP system, Uniform Manifold Approximation and Projection, you're able to bring in all 9 of those dimensions and collapse it into a 2D plot. These are arbitrary values assigned to each individual assay point in the data set. And then you can run statistical clustering algorithms on that to bring out things that are more alike and more different, essentially is what this is doing here. So this first image at the top, you can see this is the different logged lithologies using our descriptive lith code, a little bit all over the place, though there is some really good agreement with the clearly visible mafic dikes down in the bottom left corner. You run various different clustering steps, and it brings out different groups. And then we can go back to the geologists, right, and go verify, say, does this make sense? Do these line up? And then you can see how that all lines up spatially. So this is an example on all of the dikes and the intrusive lithologies. It works very, very well at NAC on the sedimentary data set as well. And so this has been really, really compelling to see and really a vote of confidence for the method. There's very clear spatial associations to the groups that are pulled out of the clustering and the UMAP projection of the geochemical data. So yeah, I don't have a laser pointer to point to this, but the green zone in the middle there, that is our large conglomerate package. Very clearly groups quite well. Our purple horizon is a finer grained, pebbly to more massive sandstone. And then there's a bit of a mixed interval of siltstone, sandstone, finer sediments above that. And it very closely aligns to what the geologists have picked out in the hand model section. So we didn't notice a ton of major faulting, and we don't see a ton of offsets in the geochemical data. So this has been a really good way to verify our interpretations and keep confidence in them going forward. It should be noted that throughout the clustering of the data, there's no spatial information associated with that. That is purely just the geochemical data. So to see it plot up so well spatially, yeah, it's just, you know, it's really, really interesting. You might notice we've got this little cluster down in the bottom left again that doesn't connect to anything. That was stuff that was mislogged. That is actually mafic dike. And so going back to that, it's just this very fine-grained, it looks a lot like our more dark altered sandstones. And so we've been able to pull out those, what were mistaken in the field, which can happen, and add that to our logged mafic dikes. And this has helped our interpolation of connecting these in space. And this is the entire data set plotted via this method. And so it shows a very clear distinction. Again, these colors aren't clustered, but this is what our different logging codes were. The big cloud is the sedimentary data set. The further to the right cluster is dikes and our Babine stock intrusive. And then with the mafic dike there, again, down on the far left. So even though in these UMAP plots, it doesn't really correlate to anything real, it does show a very real association of how different or how similar the different lithologies are, and then we can go evaluate visually and see how well it makes sense. And so this has actually worked very, very, very well at NAC. Very clear distinction between the intrusive lithologies and the sedimentary lithologies. It also works spatially very well for our most recently encountered, very strongly mineralized serrate texture felsic porphyry dike in the north of the property. We'd suspected as we were drilling it, this looks new, we haven't seen anything like this, but there's a lot of textural variability in the intrusions, and while there's similar zirconium titanium ratios or niobium scandium ratios in these rocks to other units, it's quite noisy data. This really, really sees through the noise and pretty confidently tells us that this has its own affinity, its own source. So very good to see, and it also distinguishes. We've had other instances that do look very similar to the south of the property, but they're unmineralized, and it shows a very clear distinction between our mineralized serrate dikes and our unmineralized serrate dikes. And it's not pulling in information from any of the precious metals elements. So it's not factoring in copper, it's not factoring in molybdenum, not factoring in gold or silver, but it still pulls out that distinction. So another really good vote of confidence for the method. So the takeaways so far, it's been a suitable proxy for much more extensive whole rock analysis, and we get it on continuous assay data for the whole samples. It's not a replacement for whole rock. I mean, if you're trying to do, a full breakdown of where does it plot on a ternary diagram, whole rock geochemistry, you can't replace that. But it does help us provide very clear distinctions between different units than 2D and 3D scatter plots of just the main principal components, which is probably the more commonly used method of dimension reduction. So I've got a comparison here of principal component 1 versus principal component 2 of the data set. There's some similarities, but there's much clearer breakdowns when factoring all 9 principal components and flattening that into a 2D plot. The cons within our group, only Nick knows how to do this. So it's a lot of our geologists going back and forth and saying, hey, Nick, can you help, does this make sense? Or, can you remove these? And that brings to another consideration of this. The data set filtering is very important to achieving good results, and it's heavily data set dependent. So it's not just a one-size-fits-all application of the algorithm to a data set. You need to have a really good understanding of that data set. And that's why it's really important to work really closely with the core logging geologists during the data conditioning and iterations of this. Like, this was not the first model that was pumped out of this. There's been a number of iterations, and so it takes a little bit of time. Not a ton of time, but there's definitely some finesse to getting good results out of this. But overall, it's worked really, really well for us, and now that's allowed us to look forward to our next steps here. We have a fairly comprehensive data set of hyperspectral analysis from the 2022 and 2023 data. And in the absence of a confident geological model, because there's so much lithological variation, there's a lot of alteration variation. A lot of hydrothermal alteration is heavily protolith dependent. And so now that we have nearing completion on a really well-grounded lithological model, we can start to understand that hyperspectral data a lot better, and we can use that and use similar geostatistical techniques to analyze mineralization, alteration, element enrichment, and depletion. So there's still a lot of work to do, but this is all going to go towards planning more confident drill holes, making sure our orientations are lined up to intersect the various dikes. And a lot of these dikes bring in really, really nice mineralization. They're a big part of the story at NAC, so understanding this is quite important. So yeah, that's all I have for today. I want to say thanks to everybody who's been involved in the project so far. It's been a really big team effort. We work really closely with Lake Babine Nation, whose territory we're exploring in, and we have a really good collaborative relationship with the community there. So it's been really good. Yeah, really good working relationship. And then all our geologists have been it's been great. And they've been working really, really hard in the off season to put all this together. So yeah, we're looking forward to 2025, and thanks for listening.